No. The word hung in the autumn air, simple yet immovable as a mountain. One word, after 68 years of saying yes, of cooking meals that filled bellies and hearts, of smoothing over family tensions with another slice of pie. One word that changed everything. My daughter-in-law froze, designer container suspended midair, her perfectly manicured fingers curled around plastic meant to carry away the brisket I'd spent 3 days preparing. "I beg your pardon?" her mother asked, her voice sharp as winter frost. The maple leaves rustled overhead, scattering gold and crimson shadows across our weathered farmhouse table. My family, blood and chosen, sat motionless, forks paused, breaths held. I met my son Michael's eyes. The boy I'd raised to stand tall was shrinking before me, caught between his wife's demands and his mother's unexpected resistance. I said no. My voice grew stronger. "You will not take half the food I prepared for my family. Not after arriving empty-handed with containers at the ready. Not after spending the afternoon criticizing everything from my antique table to my cooking techniques." For years, I'd watched my son fold himself smaller in his wife's presence. I'd bitten my tongue when she photographed our family traditions for social media content while calling our home quaint and provincial. I'd smiled through criticisms disguised as compliments. But watching her prepare to cart away food meant for my grandchildren's lunches, food created from recipes passed through generations, something inside me finally broke free. Welcome to Elandra Narratives. If you're new here, this channel is where I share the most meaningful stories. Stories that taught me lessons I wish I'd learned decades earlier. Every day, I bring you a family tale filled with drama, wisdom, and the kind of hard-earned truths that only come from living through difficult moments. Before we continue today's story, take a moment to subscribe and hit the notification bell so you don't miss new stories. Now let's get back to how this all began. Our century-old farmhouse sits on the outskirts of Millfield, where rolling hills fade into patchwork fields. The property came to me through my grandmother, Eliza, who raised 7 children within these walls during the Depression. Her hands, much like mine now, were never still, always creating something from nothing. "A house becomes a home through feeding those you love," she'd tell me while teaching me to roll biscuit dough. I was 8 then, standing on a wooden stool at the same kitchen counter where I now prepared meals for my own grandchildren. That maple tree where we gathered for the fateful barbecue? My father planted it the day I was born. I've measured my life against its growth, climbing its branches as a girl, reading beneath its shade as a teenager, hanging a swing from its strongest limb where I later rocked both my children through colicky nights. Daniel and I met in high school, though we weren't high school sweethearts, not exactly. He was quiet, studious, more interested in building radios than attending football games. I barely noticed him until senior year, when my car broke down during a thunderstorm. He appeared with a toolbox and fixed it without saying more than 20 words. "Thank you," I'd said, rain plastering my hair to my face. "You've got good timing," he replied, closing his toolbox. "I leave for college tomorrow." Something in his certainty, in his steady hands and quiet confidence, caught me. 3 years later, after letters that grew from friendly to something more, he returned to Millfield. "Not for the town," he said, "but for me." The autumn barbecue tradition began our first year of marriage. We were poor then, Daniel working at the lumber mill while taking night classes, me teaching 3rd grade at the elementary school. We couldn't afford a proper honeymoon, so Daniel suggested we invite friends for a harvest celebration instead. "Let's create something that's ours," he'd said, building a simple fire pit with stones from the creek. "Something that will grow with our family." That first gathering had just 6 people, Daniel's brother, my best friend from college, 2 neighbors, and us. I'd made cornbread from my grandmother's recipe and beans slow-cooked with molasses. Daniel had splurged on 5 pounds of pork shoulder, staying up all night to tend the smoker he'd built from an old oil drum. By dawn, the meat was fall-apart tender, and something in me knew we'd created a tradition that would outlast us both. As our family grew, so did the gathering. When Michael arrived, 7 pounds, 6 ounces of lungs and determination, the barbecue became his birthday celebration. Emily followed 3 years later, born in summer but equally claiming the autumn tradition as her birthright. The farmhouse witnessed it all. First steps across creaking floorboards, height marks penciled on the kitchen doorframe, homework spread across the scarred table, teenage door slammings, graduation celebrations, and eventually bringing home partners to meet the family. "The true test," Daniel would joke, "is whether they can handle the barbecue chaos." What he meant, though we never said it aloud, could they fit into our rhythms? Could they respect our traditions while adding their own thread? Emily's husband David passed this unspoken test with flying colors. He arrived at his first barbecue with homemade pickles and asked to learn Daniel's smoking technique. By his second year, he was discussing wood chip varieties with my husband like they'd been friends for decades. When my niece Catherine married Thomas, he immediately volunteered to be the barbecue's designated fire tender, staying up with Daniel to monitor temperatures through the night. The next morning, I'd found them sharing coffee and memories as dawn broke over the orchard. These were the partnerships that strengthened our family. Ones built on mutual respect and genuine appreciation for what each person brought to the table, literally and figuratively. The barbecue evolved over 30 years. What began as a simple cookout transformed into an elaborate 2-day affair. We added Daniel's maple cider, my bourbon-glazed beans, Catherine's apple pies. The guest list expanded to include cousins from distant states, neighborhood friends, even some of my former students. No matter how far families scattered throughout the year, Emily to Chicago for her architecture firm, cousins to California and Colorado, they returned for the barbecue. They booked flights months in advance, arranging work schedules around this single weekend. It's not just about the food, Emily once told me, helping scrub dishes as midnight approached after one gathering. It's about remembering who we are when we're together. The barbecue carried us through life's harshest seasons, too. The year Daniel's mother passed, we considered canceling, but she had made him promise to continue. Joy doesn't disrespect grief, she'd written in her final letter. It honors life. We held the barbecue 2 weeks after her funeral, leaving an empty chair with her favorite shawl draped across it. That night, watching my family gathered beneath stars and string lights, I understood something essential about traditions. They're lifeboats carrying us across time's unpredictable waters. So when Michael announced his engagement to Vanessa after just 4 months of dating, I suggested they attend the barbecue before setting a wedding date. Bring her to meet everyone, I said, ignoring the flutter of concern in my chest. It's the perfect way to welcome her to the family. Michael hesitated, the first warning sign I chose to ignore. She's not really the outdoor barbecue type, Mom, he said carefully. She's more sophisticated. The word landed between us, unintentionally barbed. As if our gatherings, our home, our traditions, lacked sophistication. Well, I replied, keeping my voice light, we'll make her comfortable. Everyone's welcome at our table. I meant those words sincerely. Every new person brought something valuable to our family circle. I was eager to discover what Vanessa might contribute to our traditions. I couldn't have imagined then how her arrival would test not just our barbecue, but the very foundation of our family bonds. Michael met Vanessa at a tech conference in Boston. My son, brilliant with computers but shy in crowds, had been sent by his company to present their new software. Vanessa worked for a luxury lifestyle magazine covering the event. She interviewed me, Mom. He told me during our weekly Sunday call, his voice animated in a way I hadn't heard in years. She said my ideas were refreshingly innovative. She's taking me to dinner tomorrow to discuss a feature article. By our next call, dinner had become 3 dates. By the month's end, Michael mentioned bringing her home to meet us. Then suddenly silence. 3 weeks without calls. My text messages received brief, vague responses. When he finally called again, his voice had changed, measured as if weighing each word. Vanessa thinks I should focus on networking more, he explained when I asked about the silence. She says successful people prioritize career connections over hometown check-ins. The Michael I raised had never used phrases like career connections or hometown check-ins. These weren't his words, they were hers, borrowed and repeated. When they finally visited for a weekend, Vanessa arrived in stiletto heels that sank into our gravel driveway. She surveyed our farmhouse with the polite smile of someone touring a museum exhibit, interested but detached. "This is charming," she said, the pause speaking volumes. "Michael didn't mention you were so rural." Throughout that weekend, I watched my son transform in her presence. The boy who once debated philosophy with his father now deferred to Vanessa's opinions on everything. He checked her expression before laughing at family jokes. He apologized when she sighed at his childhood stories. "Sorry," he'd say, "I'm rambling again." But he wasn't rambling. He was sharing himself, the self Vanessa seemed determined to reshape. During dinner, Daniel mentioned Michael's college dream of designing educational software for underprivileged schools. "Oh, Michael abandoned that idea," Vanessa interjected before he could respond. "We've discussed focusing on corporate clients. The profit margins are significantly better." Michael nodded, though something flickered behind his eyes, a momentary resistance quickly extinguished. Later, I found him alone on the porch swing, staring at the orchard where he'd spent countless childhood hours. "She makes me better, Mom," he said, answering my unasked question. "More ambitious. More focused. But are you happier?" I asked gently. He hesitated. "I'm more successful." That non-answer haunted me for months afterward. The engagement announcement came via text message, not even a call. The diamond in the accompanying photo was enormous, ostentatious against Vanessa's manicured hand. We learned they'd set a date just 3 months away at an exclusive vineyard resort 3 states away. "It's intimate," Michael explained when I asked about the guest list. "Only 20 people from our side were invited, despite our large extended family. Vanessa wants to keep it curated." That word, curated. As if family were accessories to be selected for aesthetic value. The wedding weekend proved revealing. Vanessa's parents, divorced and remarried to partners who seemed interchangeable in designer wear, spoke of their daughter as an investment that had matured beautifully. "We spared no expense on her education and connections," her father announced during his toast. "And now she's secured an appropriate partnership. Not a love match. A partnership. An appropriate one." The ceremony itself was magazine perfect but strangely impersonal. No childhood stories, no inside jokes, no tears of joy. Just carefully scripted vows delivered beneath an imported flower arch that cost more than our mortgage. While helping Michael straighten his tie before the ceremony, I noticed how his hands trembled. "Cold feet?" I asked, trying to sound light-hearted. "Just want to get it right," he replied, checking his reflection obsessively. "Vanessa has very specific expectations for today." At the reception, Vanessa's mother Judith approached me with champagne flute in hand. "Your quilt tradition is quite quaint," she remarked, referencing the handmade wedding quilt I'd presented during the rehearsal dinner. Each square representing a story from Michael's life. Though perhaps 2, homespun for their condo's aesthetic. I watched that quilt, 3 months of late-night stitching, of tears and prayers and memories sewn into fabric, being placed in storage before they left for their honeymoon. The changes in Michael accelerated after the wedding. Our weekly calls dwindled to monthly, then quarterly. His voice grew increasingly formal, as if speaking from a script. He missed the barbecue that first year. The first time in his life, because Vanessa had scheduled a networking weekend at a Hamptons estate. "It's important for our brand," he explained, that word "our" carrying a weight of obligation. When they finally visited at Christmas, Michael spent most of the weekend answering work emails while Vanessa critiqued my holiday decorations and photographed herself beside our rustic tree for her growing social media following. "You should consider a professional decorator next year," she suggested, rearranging the ornaments my children had made in elementary school. "I could refer someone who does a marvelous winter woodland theme." She didn't understand that each lopsided clay star and popsicle stick frame contained memories more precious than any coordinated theme could offer. That evening, I overheard them arguing in the guest room. Michael's voice uncharacteristically firm. "It's just 3 days, Vanessa. My family matters too." Her response chilled me. "If you want to succeed, you need to outgrow these provincial attachments. They're holding you back." When they left the next morning, Michael hugged me longer than usual, whispering, "I'm sorry, Mom," though for what he didn't specify. Over the following months, photos appeared on Vanessa's social media. Michael in tailored suits at gallery openings, charity galas, rooftop parties. His smile never reached his eyes. Each image captioned with phrases like "elevating our lifestyle" and "curating meaningful connections." The Michael I knew, who preferred battered jeans and philosophical debates, seemed to be vanishing pixel by pixel. When he called to confirm they would attend the upcoming barbecue, surprise caught me speechless momentarily. "Vanessa's launching a new content series on authentic American traditions," he explained. "She thinks the barbecue would make excellent material. Not a family gathering. Material. And," he added hesitantly, "her mother would like to come too. For the experience." The way he said experience, as if our family gathering were an anthropological expedition, should have prepared me. But nothing could have truly readied me for what would unfold beneath the maple trees that autumn afternoon. As I hung up the phone, a realization settled over me. They weren't coming to participate in our tradition. They were coming to consume it. What I didn't yet understand was how that distinction would force me to finally stand up not just for my barbecue, but for my son's vanishing spirit. The week before our annual barbecue, our farmhouse transformed into a command center of culinary preparation. My planning started months earlier. Ordering the brisket from Harmon's butchery, preserving summer vegetables, coordinating which family members would bring which dishes. 3 days before the gathering, I rose at dawn to begin my bourbon maple glaze, the recipe requiring slow reduction over gentle heat. My mother taught me patience through cooking. You can't rush what's worth savoring, she'd say. The glaze needed 12 hours of occasional stirring, the scent of caramelizing sugar and bourbon filling the kitchen as afternoons stretched into evening. Daniel found me checking the consistency for the 4th time that night. You're fussing more than usual, he observed, leaning against the doorframe. Is it because of Vanessa and Judith? My wooden spoon paused mid-stir. I want everything to be perfect. Eleanor, he said gently, no amount of perfect glaze will change who they are. I sighed, knowing he was right. I keep hoping if they see how much love goes into our traditions, they might understand what family really means. Daniel crossed the kitchen and wrapped his arms around my waist from behind, resting his chin on my shoulder as he had countless times over 4 decades. Just remember, he murmured, this gathering isn't about impressing them. It's about nourishing our family, the ones who appreciate what you create. The following morning, while measuring spices for my cornbread, my phone rang, Michael calling unexpectedly midweek. Mom! His voice sounded strained. About Saturday. My heart sank, anticipating cancellation. Vanessa has some requests, he continued. She's wondering if you could serve the meat on the side? She's doing a mostly plant-based diet for her followers. I set down my measuring cup. Of course, though that's quite a change for someone coming to a barbecue. And, he continued, each word more hesitant than the last, she asked if you could avoid family stories during dinner? She says they don't translate well to her content format. The cornmeal felt suddenly gritty between my fingers. Family stories were the heartbeat of our gatherings. Memories shared across generations, lessons carried forward, laughter that connected us. Michael, I said carefully, this isn't a photo shoot. It's our family tradition. Silence stretched between us, taut as overstrung wire. I know, Mom, he finally whispered. I'm trying to balance everything. After we hung up, I stood motionless in the kitchen, surrounded by ingredients that had witnessed 5 generations of my family's history. The cinnamon passed down from my grandmother. The cast iron skillet seasoned by decades of use. The handwritten recipe cards stained with evidence of countless meals. These weren't mere objects, they were vessels of our family's story. And Vanessa wanted that story silenced for her content format. That evening, Daniel found me in the attic, pulling out photo albums from Michael's childhood. What are you looking for? He asked, settling beside me on the dusty floor. I'm not sure, I admitted, opening an album to Michael at 7, grinning with a missing front tooth, proudly holding a fish he'd caught with his father. Maybe the son we used to know. Daniel traced the photograph with his fingertip. He's still in there, Eleanor. Beneath all of Vanessa's expectations. What if he isn't? I voiced my deepest fear. What if we've lost him completely? Then this weekend becomes even more important, Daniel said, his voice steady despite the emotion in his eyes. It's a chance to remind him who he is when he's not performing for her approval. The day before the barbecue, Emily arrived early to help with preparations. As we chopped vegetables for her wild rice salad, she broached the subject I'd been avoiding. David heard from Michael yesterday, she said carefully. He sounded anxious. I focused on perfectly dicing a bell pepper. About what? Emily's knife paused. Apparently Vanessa and her mother have been discussing the content opportunities from this weekend. David got the impression they're treating this less like a family gathering and more like a cultural safari? I suggested. Mom, Emily said, setting down her knife. You don't have to pretend this doesn't bother you. It bothers all of us. I looked at my daughter, so perceptive, so fiercely protective of our family bonds. What would you do? I asked honestly. Emily considered this. I'd remember that Michael has to make his own choices. But I wouldn't let them disrespect what matters to us either. That night, I barely slept. Instead, I sat on the porch swing, wrapped in my mother's shawl, watching stars fade as dawn approached. The maple leaves rustled above me, seemingly whispering wisdom I strained to catch. I thought about boundaries, how I'd never been good at establishing them. How I'd always believed love meant accommodation, generosity without limitation. How I'd taught my children to share, to welcome, to give, perhaps without teaching them when it was necessary to stand firm. By sunrise, I'd reached no clear resolution. But watching golden light spill across our land, the orchard where my children had played, the fields where we'd hosted summer picnics, the garden that had fed us through lean years. Something solidified within me. This land had nourished us not by depleting itself, but by operating according to natural boundaries: seasons, rainfall, sunlight. Nothing in nature gave endlessly without replenishment, without respect. When Daniel joined me, coffee mugs in hand, he found me different than the anxious woman who'd climbed the attic stairs the previous day. "You've decided something," he observed, not a question. "Yes," I replied, accepting the steaming mug. "I've decided this gathering will unfold authentically, messy family stories included. If that doesn't suit Vanessa's content needs, so be it." Daniel smiled, the corners of his eyes crinkling. "There's my Eleanor." As morning progressed, I marinated the brisket with practiced hands, reciting my mother's instructions from memory. I polished grandmother's serving platters until they gleamed. I arranged tables beneath the maple tree, decorating with wildflowers and candles in mason jars. Each action felt like a declaration. This is who we are, unfiltered and imperfect. This is what we value. This is worth preserving. When Catherine arrived with her apple pies, when Emily's children raced to help arrange chairs, when David started discussing wood chip varieties with Daniel, I watched these moments with renewed appreciation. Here was my real family, contributing, participating, valuing what we'd built together. The irony wasn't lost on me that after 30 years hosting this gathering, it took Vanessa's threatened disruption to make me truly see what we'd created, and what was worth protecting. As the afternoon approached, bringing Michael's car up our gravel driveway, I stood at the kitchen window. Whatever happened next, I was ready, not for confrontation but for truth. Not to push my son away, but to remind him of the authentic connections he deserved. Sometimes love isn't about endless accommodation. Sometimes it's about creating space where genuine relationships can flourish. Relationships built on mutual respect, not performance and extraction. As car doors slammed and voices approached our porch, I squared my shoulders. The barbecue wasn't just about food, it was about nourishment of a deeper kind. And I was determined that everyone at my table would understand the difference. The crunch of tires on gravel announced Michael's arrival. I smoothed my apron, the one embroidered with autumn leaves that Emily had given me for Mother's Day, and took a steadying breath. Through the kitchen window, I watched my son emerge from his silver sedan. Gone was his customary casual attire, replaced by pressed chinos and a button-down shirt that looked uncomfortable in the afternoon heat. He glanced toward our front door, then back at the passenger side where Vanessa was checking her reflection in the visor mirror. Behind them, another car pulled in, sleek, black, rental company sticker barely visible on the bumper. Judith had arrived. "They're here," I announced to Daniel, who squeezed my shoulder before heading to the porch. The screen door creaked open, then Michael's familiar footsteps. When he appeared in the kitchen doorway, I noticed new lines around his eyes, a tightness in his smile that hadn't been there at Christmas. "Mom," he said, leaning down to kiss my cheek. His cologne was different, something expensive that masked rather than complemented his natural scent. "Everything smells amazing." Before I could respond, Vanessa entered behind him, designer sunglasses perched atop her perfectly styled hair. She wore cream-colored clothes to a barbecue, an impractical choice that communicated volumes about her intentions for the day. Not to participate, but to perform. "Eleanor," she said, air-kissing near my cheek without making contact. Her eyes scanned our kitchen, cataloging each detail. "Your home is exactly as rustic as Michael described." I felt Daniel's hand at the small of my back, a silent reminder of our conversation the night before. "Thank you for having us," Vanessa continued, setting her large designer tote by the door. "Mother is just parking. She's so excited to see your famous barbecue that Michael raves about." I waited for her to produce something, a bottle of wine, flowers, even store-bought cookies. But her hands remained empty, her attention already shifting to our living room. "Michael, remember to get the lighting right for my Instagram stories," she instructed. "Natural light but not direct sun." Michael nodded, tension visible in his jaw. "Let me help Dad with the wood first." "But the golden hour lighting," Vanessa began. "I'll just be a few minutes," he said, an edge in his voice I hadn't heard him use with her before. He followed Daniel outside, shoulders relaxing slightly once beyond the threshold. The back door opened again, and Judith swept in wearing a camel-colored pantsuit better suited for a corporate boardroom than our backyard gathering. Like her daughter, she carried an oversized bag, but no contribution for the meal. "Eleanor," she offered a cool smile. Your little place is just as charming as Vanessa described. I noticed her surveying our kitchen with the same evaluative gaze as her daughter. Her eyes lingered on my grandmother's well-worn cutting board where I'd arranged fresh herbs. Is that sanitary? She asked, eyebrow arched. It's been in our family for 3 generations, I replied evenly. Properly maintained, wood has natural antimicrobial properties. Judith made a non-committal sound before joining Vanessa in the living room. Through the doorway, I watched them examining my mother's quilt hanging on the wall, heads tilted identically. Interesting choice, Judith commented, voice carrying deliberately. Very folksy. Vanessa nodded, phone already out. Perfect backdrop for my Embracing Heritage series. The algorithm loves nostalgic content. The sound of another car drew my attention back to the window. Catherine and Thomas were arriving, their 2-year-old sedan packed with children and homemade contributions. The contrast couldn't have been sharper. Catherine burst through the door moments later, apple pie balanced in one hand while the other swept me into a hug that smelled of cinnamon and autumn air. Aunt Eleanor, she exclaimed, setting down her pie to embrace me properly. We picked the apples yesterday at Grover's Orchard. Remember how we used to go there when I was little? Thomas followed with a bottle of local bourbon. For the glaze, he said, though I wouldn't object if some found its way into glasses later. Their genuine warmth filled the kitchen, pushing back against the chill Vanessa and Judith had brought. Catherine immediately rolled up her sleeves and washed her hands at the sink. Put me to work, she said. Those potatoes won't peel themselves. When I introduced her to Vanessa and Judith, the contrast in greeting styles was immediate. Catherine offered a warm handshake and genuine compliment about Vanessa's earrings. Vanessa responded with a practiced smile that disappeared the moment Catherine turned away. Quaint family, I overheard Judith murmur to her daughter. Very provincial. Catherine caught my eye, her expression conveying both amusement and concern. I shook my head slightly, no need to engage. Outside, Michael was helping Daniel arrange the brisket on the smoker, their heads bent together in conversation. Through the window, I watched my son's gestures become more animated, more natural, as if proximity to his father was thawing something frozen within him. When Emily's family arrived next, the energy shifted further. Her children, Lily and James, raced into the kitchen with homemade place cards they'd created for everyone. Grandma, look, Lily exclaimed, proudly displaying her artwork. I wrote everyone's names in cursive. Beautiful, I praised, noticing she'd included cards for Vanessa and Judith without being prompted. Emily entered with her wild rice salad, while David carried a case of craft beer from a local brewery. Like Catherine, Emily immediately tied on an apron and began arranging serving platters without being asked. Mom, everything smells incredible, she said, sliding seamlessly into our preparation rhythm. What can I do? The kitchen bustled with familiar energy, 3 generations moving in practiced coordination. Catherine's husband Thomas joined Daniel and Michael outside. Emily's children set the picnic tables with my grandmother's mismatched china. David started arranging the craft beer in ice-filled galvanized tubs. Through it all, Vanessa and Judith remained in the living room, occasionally venturing to the kitchen doorway to observe without offering assistance. Should we help? I overheard Michael ask Vanessa quietly when he came inside for drinks. Your family has their system, she replied dismissively. We'd just be in the way. He hesitated, conflict evident in his expression. But everyone pitches in. That's kind of the point. I'm documenting, she countered, showing him her phone screen. That's my contribution. When preparations neared completion, the family naturally gravitated toward the backyard. The afternoon sun filtered through maple leaves, creating dappled golden light across tables draped with my collection of autumn-hued tablecloths. Candles waited in mason jars for evening's approach. It's perfect, Mom, Michael said quietly, appearing beside me as I arranged cornbread on my grandmother's serving tray. For a moment I glimpsed my real son, appreciative, present, connected to our traditions. The moment shattered when Vanessa called from the porch. Michael, the lighting is perfect now. I need you for my introduction video. His expression shuddered, shoulders tensing as he turned toward her voice. Coming. When it was time to bring the food outside, everyone formed a natural procession, except Vanessa and Judith, who positioned themselves at the head of the buffet line. This all looks very homespun, Judith commented as she filled her plate with the largest pieces of brisket. Eleanor, the meat seems a bit overdone on the edges, Vanessa added, selecting several prime slices for herself. In the city, they serve it with a much lighter smoke ring. Emily stiffened beside me, but I touched her arm gently. Everyone has their preferences, I said mildly. As we settled around the tables, Daniel said the blessing, his deep voice carrying across the gathering with the same words he'd spoken for decades. When he finished, Vanessa immediately took out her phone. "This lighting is perfect," she said, standing to photograph her plate from multiple angles. "My followers are going to love this authentic country barbecue experience." I watched as she typed, "Embracing rural traditions with the in-laws. Nothing beats homemade comfort food. Hashtag authentic living, hashtag country life, hashtag family traditions." Judith leaned over to look. "Tag me in that, dear. My book club will be so impressed that I'm experiencing a real country barbecue." The conversation flowed around them. Stories of family memories, updates on cousins who couldn't make it, plans for the upcoming holidays. Throughout the meal, I noticed Michael's gaze darting between his wife and his family members, as if trying to bridge two increasingly separate worlds. Vanessa and Judith ate heartily despite their criticisms, helping themselves to seconds before others had finished their first servings. Between bites, they continued photographing each dish, each table setting, even Daniel's weathered hands as he carved more brisket. "The lighting is just so authentic," Vanessa repeated, directing Michael to capture her pretending to listen to a story Emily was telling the children. When Catherine brought out her apple pie and Emily's children passed around the homemade ice cream they'd helped churn that morning, I noticed Vanessa whispering to Michael while glancing toward the remaining brisket on the serving table. The conversation grew too audible to ignore. "There's so much left," she said, her voice carrying more than she perhaps intended. "It would be a shame to let it go to waste." Michael looked uncomfortable. "Mom usually saves the leftovers for soup and sandwiches during the week." "But you said we could take some home," Vanessa insisted. "I already told my co-workers I'd bring them authentic barbecue on Monday." Before Michael could respond, Judith stood up. "I'll get our containers," she announced, heading toward the house. The atmosphere shifted, a sudden tension falling over the gathering. Emily and Catherine exchanged glances across the table. Daniel's hand found mine beneath the tablecloth. The moment I'd been unconsciously preparing for since they arrived had finally come. Not with raised voices or obvious conflict, but with the quiet presumption that our family's food, effort, and traditions were theirs to package and remove. As Judith returned with an armful of containers, as Vanessa began directing Michael to fill them with the choicest pieces of meat, I felt something fundamental shifting inside me, like tectonic plates that had been under pressure for years suddenly finding release. 3 decades of gathering my family around this table. 3 days of cooking this particular meal. 3 generations of recipes and traditions, now being portioned into plastic containers for strangers who would never know their meaning. "Make sure to get the end pieces for your father," Judith instructed Michael. "And don't forget the sauce. Bernard loves a good sauce." Bernard, a man I'd never met, never cooked for, now being served from my family table. "We should probably take some of that wild rice salad too," Vanessa added, pointing to Emily's contribution. "For complete meals." Emily caught my eye across the table, her expression mirroring my own disbelief. Then Michael did something that broke my heart. He began methodically filling the containers, his face flushed with embarrassment, but his hands steady, as if this was his duty now, to facilitate the removal of my food, my love, my tradition from our family table. "Oh, and we should get some of that pie," Judith said, eyeing Catherine's apple creation. "I have just the perfect small containers for dessert." The container she produced could have held half the remaining pie. The moment of truth had arrived, suspended in autumn air scented with maple and smoke. Every story, every preparation, every boundary I'd contemplated on the porch swing the night before crystallized into a single, necessary word. "No," I said simply. The word hung in the space between us, small but immovable as a mountain. "I beg your pardon?" Judith said, container poised midair. I said no. I repeated, my voice steady. "You will not be taking home half of the food I spent days preparing, that cost hundreds of dollars from my retirement account, that was meant to nourish this family and create memories around this table." Vanessa's cheeks flushed crimson. "Michael said." "I don't care what Michael said," I interrupted, surprising even myself with my firmness. "This is my home. This is my family's tradition. You arrived with empty hands, but containers at the ready. You've criticized everything from my table to my cooking, taken photos to create some artificial version of authentic living, and now you want to pack up our food as if this were a restaurant with takeout service." The silence that followed was absolute. Even the children had stopped playing to stare. The maple leaves ceased their rustling, as if nature itself held its breath. Michael stood frozen between worlds, plastic containers in hand, eyes darting between his wife and me as if trying to calculate which earthquake would cause less devastation. "Mom," he began, his voice strained. "Vanessa didn't mean." "Yes, she did," I said quietly. "And you know it." Vanessa's expression hardened into something cold and unfamiliar. "This is incredibly rude," she said, voice sharp as winter frost. "We are guests in your home." "No," I corrected her. "Guests bring contributions, not criticisms. Guests offer to help, not document our lives for social media content. Guests express gratitude, not entitlement." I looked around the table at my family, Emily's supportive gaze, Catherine's slight nod, Daniel's hand steady on my shoulder. For 30 years, this gathering has been about connection, about creating something together, not extracting from it. Everyone here contributed something to this meal except you and Judith. Everyone helped prepare it except you. Everyone respected its meaning except you. I turned to Michael, my voice softening. "I raised you to recognize respect, Michael. I raised you to stand up for what's right, even when it's difficult." Daniel rose to stand beside me, his presence warm and solid. "I think," he said, his deep voice gentle but firm, "that it might be best if you took your empty containers and left." "Fine," Vanessa snapped, grabbing her bag. "This rustic experience has been thoroughly disappointing anyway. Come on, Michael." And there it was, the ultimatum, spoken not in words but in the expectation that my son would follow her without question, abandoning his family as easily as folding a napkin. Michael stood paralyzed, plastic containers still in his hands, looking younger and more lost than I'd seen him since he was a teenager uncertain about leaving for college. "Michael," Judith said sharply. "We're leaving." My son looked at me, then at his wife, then down at the containers in his hands. With deliberate care, he set them down on the table. "No," he said, so quietly I almost didn't hear him. "What did you say?" Vanessa demanded, disbelief etched across her features. I said no. His voice grew stronger with each syllable. "My mother is right. This isn't okay, Vanessa. None of this has been okay." The color drained from Vanessa's face. "If you stay, don't bother coming home," she said, voice tight with fury. Michael flinched as if struck, but stood his ground. "Then I guess I'll be staying at my parents' tonight." Tension crackled in the air between them, a marriage dissolving in the space of 30 seconds. "This family is dysfunctional," Judith announced to no one in particular as she gathered her things. "Come, Vanessa. We don't need to subject ourselves to this provinciality any longer." Vanessa hesitated, seeming genuinely shocked that her ultimatum had failed. For a moment, vulnerability flickered across her face, a glimpse of genuine emotion beneath the calculated exterior. "Michael," she said, her voice smaller now. "Please." I saw my son waver, saw the ingrained habit of accommodation almost overtake his resolve. Then Emily's daughter Lily tugged at Michael's sleeve. "Uncle Mike, you promised to toast marshmallows with us later." Such a simple thing, a child's reminder of a promise. Yet I watched it anchor my son, remind him of who he was beyond Vanessa's expectations. "I did promise," he said to Lily, then looked back at his wife. "I'm staying, Vanessa." They left in a flurry of slammed doors and spinning gravel. The space they left behind seemed to exhale, as if the very house had been holding its breath. Michael sank into a chair, his face in his hands. "Mom, Dad. I'm so sorry. I don't know how I let things get this far." Daniel squeezed his shoulder. "You're here now. That's what matters." The children, sensing the storm had passed, gradually returned to their play. Emily and Catherine began quietly clearing the abandoned containers. The evening breeze stirred the maple leaves above us, gold and crimson against the darkening sky. "I think," I said, "that we could all use some of that maple cider now." Later, as lanterns glowed against twilight and conversations resumed around the fire pit, I found Michael sitting alone on the porch steps. "I kept trying to be what she wanted," he said without preamble. "Kept thinking if I changed enough, she'd finally be satisfied." I settled beside him, our shoulders touching. "And were you ever enough?" He shook his head. "There was always something more to fix, to improve, to cure it." "That's not love," I said gently. "Love sees you clearly and cherishes what it sees." "I think I forgot who I was," he admitted. Somewhere between meeting her and today, I lost track of myself. I looked at my son's profile against the gathering darkness. So like his father's, strong and thoughtful. People who truly love you help you become more yourself, not less. He nodded slowly. "I don't know what happens next." "Tonight," I said, You toast marshmallows with your niece who adores you. Tomorrow we'll face whatever comes. Daniel appeared in the doorway, firelight silhouetting his familiar form. Fire's ready for those marshmallows, he announced. And the children are getting impatient. Michael stood, offering me his hand to rise, a small gesture of the boy I'd raised returning. As we walked toward the gathering, where families circled the flames sharing stories and laughter, I felt a bittersweet certainty. Today's confrontation wasn't an ending, it was a beginning. My son had taken his first step back toward himself, toward authentic connection rather than performance. As Emily passed him a marshmallow skewer, as Catherine's husband made room for him beside the fire, as Lily climbed into his lap with complete trust, I watched my family embrace him without question or condition. This was the gift of true belonging, not something to be photographed or curated, but lived moment by imperfect moment. If you've ever stood at a crossroads between authentic connection and hollow performance, if you've ever needed to reclaim your voice or help someone find theirs again, remember that sometimes the most profound act of love is a simple, powerful no. Michael stayed with us for 2 weeks after that day. The first morning, I found him at the kitchen table before dawn, staring into a mug of coffee gone cold. Couldn't sleep? I asked, sliding into the chair across from him. My phone's been buzzing all night, he replied. 43 missed calls. 67 texts. From Vanessa? He nodded. And Judith. And Vanessa's father. And 2 of her friends. He pushed the phone away like it might bite. They're all telling me I'm making a catastrophic mistake. I busied myself making fresh coffee, giving him space to continue or not. The thing is, he said after a moment, this is the first time in months I've felt like I can actually breathe. That first week, Michael moved through our home like a visitor relearning forgotten customs. He startled when Emily dropped by unannounced with soup. He asked permission to use the workshop where he'd built countless projects growing up. He apologized constantly for imposing, despite our assurances that he was home. Vanessa's digital campaign began 3 days after the barbecue. First came vague social media posts about toxic family situations and standing your ground against rural narrow-mindedness. Then carefully edited video clips from our gathering, Michael looking uncomfortable, Judith appearing shocked, my kitchen appearing deliberately more rustic through selective framing. Mother-in-law meltdown at family barbecue, screamed the caption. Wait for her reaction when we tried to take leftovers. The video conveniently excluded their arrival with empty hands but containers ready, their criticisms throughout the day, their expectation that Michael would serve as their personal food packer. Emily called in a panic. Mom, it's getting thousands of views. Should we respond? No, I said firmly. Anyone who knows us won't believe it. Anyone who doesn't know us doesn't matter. Michael retreated to the orchard when shown the video, disappearing among apple trees for hours. Daniel found him sitting beneath the oldest tree, the one Michael had fallen from at age 8, breaking his arm but demanding to climb again the very day his cast came off. She's rewriting everything, Michael told his father. Making me a victim, making Mom a villain. None of it's real. Does that surprise you? Daniel asked gently. Michael's silence answered more honestly than words could have. By day 5, Vanessa switched tactics. Tearful phone calls replaced angry texts. Promises to change. Reminders of their investment in each other. Appeals to not throw away their marriage over one misunderstanding. I found Michael on the porch swing that evening, phone clutched in his hand, knuckles white. She says she'll go to counseling, he said without preamble. Says she never realized how her behavior affected me. What do you think? I asked, careful to keep my tone neutral. I think. He paused, searching for words. I think if she genuinely understood, she wouldn't have posted that video humiliating my family. The following morning, a designer gift basket arrived, gourmet foods, expensive wine, artisanal cheeses. The card read simply, we can create new traditions. Michael stared at it for long minutes before carrying it to the community food pantry downtown, unopened. That afternoon, he disappeared into Daniel's workshop. The familiar sounds of sanding and measuring drifted through open windows, rhythmic, meditative. He emerged at dusk with sawdust in his hair and the first genuine smile I'd seen in months. I'm building a bookshelf, he announced at dinner. For my new place. Daniel and I exchanged glances. This was the first mention of future plans. Your new place? I echoed carefully. Michael nodded, serving himself seconds of pot roast. I called about that apartment above the bookstore downtown. The one with the corner windows. It's available next month. His certainty, his appetite, the easy way he passed the salt to Daniel. small gestures revealing significant shifts within. On day 10, Catherine invited Michael to help at the community garden where she volunteered. He returned muddy and sunburned, carrying zucchini the size of baseball bats. They need someone to rebuild their irrigation system, he reported, washing vegetables at the sink. I told them I'd draw up some plans. The old Michael emerging, the one who solved problems, who built things, who connected with community without calculating personal advantage. That night, Vanessa appeared in our driveway unannounced. Through the window, I watched her check her reflection before approaching our door. Perfect makeup, designer outfit, practiced expression of contrite dignity. Michael met her on the porch. I couldn't hear their conversation, but I observed their body language, her performative gestures, his steady stillness. When she reached for his hand, he stepped back. When she moved closer, he maintained distance. 10 minutes later, she drove away. Michael returned inside, expression both weary and resolute. She wanted me to come home tonight, he said, settling beside Daniel on the sofa. Said she's redecorated our bedroom as a surprise. And? Daniel asked. And I told her I've signed a 6-month lease downtown. That I need space to figure out who I am without her expectations shaping me. Neither Daniel nor I commented on what this meant for their marriage. Some realizations need space to unfold at their own pace. The following day, Michael called his company and requested a transfer to their Millfield office. A smaller role, but one that wouldn't require the networking events and social performances Vanessa had insisted were crucial to his career. My boss actually sounded relieved, he told us over lunch. Said I seemed unhappy in the executive track anyway. That afternoon, he helped Daniel split wood for winter, rhythmic, physical work that required presence rather than performance. I watched them through the kitchen window, my husband teaching our son once again how to position the axe for a clean split, just as he had when Michael was 14. Some lessons need relearning. Some strengths need rediscovering. By the second weekend, Michael had scheduled viewings for 3 apartments, connected with old friends from high school, and submitted design proposals for the community garden's irrigation system. The hollowness in his cheeks began filling out as he ate with genuine appetite rather than measured restraint. On his last night before moving to the apartment downtown, Michael cooked dinner for us. Not the elaborate foodie creations Vanessa had taught him to prepare, but his grandmother's simple beef stew with dumplings. "Remember when I was 10 and you taught me to make this?" he asked me, stirring carefully. "You said cooking isn't about impressing people, it's about nourishing them." I nodded, watching him measure flour with comfortable imprecision. "I forgot that somewhere along the way," he continued. "Started thinking everything was about impression management. Food, clothes, home, job, even marriage. All just carefully curated exhibits in the museum of our lives." Daniel looked up from setting the table. "And now?" Michael dropped dumplings into the simmering stew, his movements confident and unhurried. "Now I'm remembering what's real. What matters? Who I actually am when I'm not performing for approval." Over dinner, he mentioned running into Olivia Mitchell at the bookstore, a local librarian he'd known casually in high school. "She's starting a literacy program for kids after school," he said, passing the bread basket. Asked if I'd help build some low bookshelves for the children's corner. The way he mentioned her name, casual yet precise, caught my attention. But I simply nodded, recognizing that new connections would form in their own time, when he was ready. After dinner, the 3 of us walked the property in comfortable silence. Autumn was deepening, maple leaves intensifying from gold to flame. At the orchard's edge, Michael paused. "Thank you," he said simply, "for saying no that day. For showing me it was possible." Daniel squeezed his shoulder. "You made the harder choice, son. We just created space for you to make it." Michael shook his head. I'd forgotten how. Forgotten that boundaries aren't rejections, they're actually invitations to more authentic connection. The following morning, as Michael loaded his few belongings into his car, I handed him a package wrapped in brown paper. "What's this?" he asked. "Open it when you get settled," I replied. Later that evening, my phone chimed with a message. A photo of Michael's new apartment, sparsely furnished but with a small bookshelf already installed, and on the wall above his desk, the contents of my package. The family photo from last Christmas, and beside it, a framed cross-stitch I'd made during those 2 weeks of his stay. The stitching read simply, "Authenticity is not the harsh absence of filters, but the gentle presence of truth." Below the photo, Michael had written, "Building a life that's real, not just impressive. Thank you for showing me the difference." As I showed the message to Daniel, I felt certainty settle within me. The road ahead for Michael wouldn't be straight or simple. Disentangling from Vanessa, emotionally and legally, would test his newfound boundaries. Rediscovering his authentic self would involve wrong turns and doubtful moments. But he had taken the crucial first step away from performance toward genuine connection. Away from curated perfection toward messy authenticity. If you've watched someone you love lose themselves in another person's expectations, if you've struggled to set boundaries without breaking connections, remember this. True belonging never requires you to betray yourself. Autumn faded into winter, then bloomed into spring. Michael's 6-month lease became permanent when he purchased the apartment above the bookstore. His first independent decision in years. "It's not much," he told us during our first visit, "but every item here is something I chose." The space reflected his emerging self, bookshelves he'd built with his father, photographs of landscapes rather than posed social moments, comfortable furniture selected for reading rather than impressing visitors. No staged vignettes for social media, no designer pieces chosen for brand recognition. Just authentic comfort. Just Michael. The divorce proceedings began 3 months after the barbecue. Vanessa hired an aggressive attorney from the city who sent threatening letters about Michael's abandonment and emotional neglect. "She's requesting alimony," Michael reported during Sunday dinner, his voice incredulous. "Says she sacrificed career advancement to support my professional growth." Daniel set down his fork. "Did she?" Michael shook his head. "She used our marriage to expand her social media following. Called it her authentic lifestyle content platform. When the initial settlement proposal arrived demanding half of Michael's retirement savings and continued access to his family connections for professional purposes, he didn't waver. 5 years ago, I would have signed anything to avoid conflict," he admitted. "Now I recognize her pattern, push until I surrender, then push further." He hired a measured but firm local attorney who specialized in high-conflict divorces. Their strategy wasn't aggression but calm documentation. Evidence of Vanessa's unchanged lifestyle, her growing sponsorship income, her fabricated narratives about their marriage. "My goal isn't punishment," Michael explained when Emily questioned his restraint. "It's freedom. Clean, complete freedom to move forward." Meanwhile, Vanessa's digital reinvention continued. Her followers watched her healing journey unfold through carefully filtered posts, meditation retreats, therapy references, inspirational quotes about outgrowing relationships that no longer serve personal evolution. She crafted a compelling narrative of self-discovery after escaping a stifling small-town marriage. Her version of events portrayed her as the protagonist who bravely chose authentic urban living over provincial limitations. What remained unmentioned? Her continued demands for financial support, her attempts to claim credit for business connections Michael had developed, her midnight calls that alternated between tearful reconciliation pleas and cold legal threats. "She's rewritten our entire relationship," Michael observed without bitterness. "Sometimes I almost believe her version." "That's how it worked for years," I reminded him gently. "Her reality becoming yours." As winter thawed, Michael's community connections deepened. He joined the town's infrastructure committee, drawing on his engineering background to help solve Millfield's outdated water system problems. He volunteered weekends at the community garden, rebuilding their greenhouse using salvaged materials. And he began spending time with Olivia Mitchell, the librarian he'd mentioned months earlier. Their connection developed organically through shared volunteer work. When Michael designed bookshelves for the library's children's program, Olivia invited him to read at their Saturday story hours. When Olivia mentioned struggling with her garden plot, Michael offered irrigation advice. No performative dates. No status-seeking restaurants. Just 2 people connecting through genuine interests and complementary strengths. "She doesn't have social media," Michael mentioned casually one evening while helping me weed my spring garden. "Says she'd rather live experiences than document them." I kept my expression neutral despite my internal smile. "That sounds refreshing." "It is," he agreed, carefully removing dandelions without disturbing neighboring seedlings. "When we're together, we're actually present. No pausing for photo opportunities or crafting captions in our heads." The contrast with his marriage hung unspoken between us. 6 months into the divorce proceedings, Vanessa's attorney requested mediation. Her social media popularity wasn't translating to legal advantage. The prenuptial agreement Michael had signed, at her insistence ironically, limited her claims, and her own financial success undermined her dependency arguments. The day before mediation, Vanessa made one final attempt at manipulation. She arrived unannounced at Michael's apartment with a professional photographer. For closure, she explained through his partially opened door. My followers have invested in our journey. They deserve a thoughtful conclusion. Michael closed the door without responding. In mediation, Vanessa presented herself as the wounded party seeking reasonable accommodation. But when Michael's attorney quietly presented documentation of her contradictory social media narrative and sponsored content income, her performance crumbled. The settlement concluded that afternoon. Straightforward, financially equitable, emotionally liberating. No ongoing entanglements, no shared assets, no prolonged legal battle. How do you feel? I asked when he called with the news. Lighter, he answered simply. Like I've set down something heavy I never should have been carrying. That evening, Michael invited us to a small gathering at his apartment. Just family and a few close friends to mark this transition. Emily brought her signature lemon cake. Daniel arrived with a bottle of 18-year-old scotch he'd been saving for a significant occasion. Olivia came too, bringing sourdough bread she'd baked that morning and heirloom tomato plants for Michael's newly installed balcony containers. As conversation flowed around his living room, genuine, unforced, unmarked by performance anxiety, I observed my son. The tension that had become so familiar in his expression during his marriage had disappeared. He laughed without checking if his reaction was appropriate. He spoke without filtering his thoughts for acceptable content. You seem happy, I mentioned quietly when we found ourselves alone in his small kitchen. Not constantly, he clarified, arranging cookies on a plate. Some days are still hard. Some habits still need unlearning. But, I prompted. But I'm real now, he said thoughtfully. Everything in my life, this apartment, my job at the local engineering firm, my friends, it's all chosen consciously, not accumulated to create an impression. Through the doorway, we could see Olivia engaged in animated conversation with Emily about native plant restoration. No phone in sight, no performance underway. Just authentic exchange between people with shared interests. She seems lovely, I observed neutrally. Michael smiled. She's the opposite of curated. Yesterday, she showed up for coffee with garden dirt under her fingernails and didn't apologize once. Just said she'd lost track of time trying to save her tomato plants from an unexpected frost. The simple delight in his voice revealed more than elaborate praise could have. Spring mellowed into summer. Michael's divorce finalized with little fanfare. Just paperwork acknowledging the official end of a union that had emotionally concluded months earlier. The same week, Vanessa announced her engagement to a prominent restaurateur from Chicago. Her social media exploded with carefully staged proposal photos, her narrative seamlessly transitioning from healing journey to unexpected second chance at love. 6 weeks, Daniel noted when we saw the announcement. She knew him before your divorce was final. Michael shrugged, genuine indifference replacing what would once have been hurt. That's always been her pattern, securing the next source of content before releasing the previous one. His detachment wasn't bitterness but perspective, the clear-eyed recognition of patterns he'd been too enmeshed to see while married. As summer progressed, Michael expanded his balcony garden under Olivia's guidance. He returned to playing guitar, something Vanessa had discouraged as unprofessional. He began mentoring local high school students interested in engineering. Small choices, daily decisions, each one reclaiming pieces of himself that had been set aside to accommodate his marriage. The strangest part, he told me during our weekly garden walks, is realizing how many of my preferences weren't actually mine. I believed I preferred modern minimalist design because Vanessa insisted it was sophisticated. Turns out I like craftsman furniture and colorful textiles. These discoveries extended beyond furniture to fundamental values. Without Vanessa's influence, Michael reconnected with his original ambition to develop educational technology. He began creating affordable software for rural schools with limited resources, work that energized rather than depleted him. I'm making a third of my previous salary, he admitted. But I sleep better knowing my work matters beyond its profit margin. By late summer, Michael and Olivia's friendship had evolved into something deeper, though they moved forward with intentional slowness. We're both determined to build something genuine, Michael explained. Something based on who we actually are, not who we think we should be for each other. Their relationship developed without social media announcements or status signaling. Instead of expensive restaurants, they enjoyed picnics in the community garden they both helped maintain. Instead of theatrical gestures, they expressed care through consistent presence and practical support. When Olivia caught a severe summer cold, Michael didn't send designer gift baskets. He simply showed up with homemade soup and quietly restocked her refrigerator while she rested. When Michael struggled with a difficult work deadline, Olivia didn't offer performative sympathy. She created space in her apartment where he could work uninterrupted, occasionally appearing with coffee and stepping away without demanding attention. "It's partnership," Michael observed, "not performance." The contrast with his marriage became increasingly evident as months passed. Where Vanessa had required constant acknowledgement, Olivia gave space for individual growth. Where his marriage had demanded perfect alignment with Vanessa's preferences, his relationship with Olivia celebrated their differences as opportunities for expansion rather than conflicts requiring resolution. One evening in late summer, Michael invited us to dinner at his apartment. Olivia was there too, comfortable in his kitchen as they prepared a simple meal together, moving around each other with the easy rhythm of genuine compatibility. "I have news," Michael announced as we enjoyed dessert on his balcony, surrounded by thriving tomato plants and cascading herbs. "I've been offered a position developing accessible technology for rural classrooms. It would mean some travel to remote areas, but the work aligns perfectly with what I've always wanted to do." The joy in his voice needed no amplification. "That's wonderful," Daniel said, raising his glass in toast. "There's more," Michael continued, glancing at Olivia with unguarded affection. "Olivia's been asked to develop a regional literacy program that would coordinate with my school technology work." Olivia smiled. "Separate projects but complementary missions. We'd be working toward the same goals without entangling our professional identities." The deliberate boundary struck me, not separation but healthy distinction. Both pursuing meaningful work while supporting each other's distinct paths. As evening deepened around us, conversation flowing without pretense or performance, I reflected on the transformation of the past year. My son had journeyed from performing a curated life to living an authentic one. From relationship as acquisition to relationship as genuine connection. The healing hadn't been instantaneous or perfect. There had been difficult days, legal battles, moments of doubt. But through it all, Michael had consistently chosen authenticity over appearance, substance over style, genuine connection over impressive acquisition. The most beautiful part of Michael's journey wasn't that he emerged unscathed. It was that he emerged more fully himself, more capable of genuine connection precisely because he'd experienced its counterfeit. 6 months after the divorce finalized, autumn returned to Millfield. The maple trees outside our farmhouse blazed with familiar gold and crimson. "Time for another barbecue," Michael called. Daniel announced one evening. "He's asked if he can bring Olivia this weekend." The contrast between this year's preparation and last couldn't have been starker. No anxiety, no special accommodations, no walking on eggshells. Just the comfortable rhythm of a tradition that had weathered its greatest test and emerged stronger. When Michael's car pulled into our driveway, I watched from the kitchen window as he helped Olivia unload several cloth bags and a ceramic dish wrapped carefully in a kitchen towel. "We brought sourdough," Olivia said, handing me a still warm loaf as she entered. "And my grandmother's sweet potato casserole. Michael says you love trying new recipes." No designer clothes, no calculated entrance. Just jeans, a comfortable sweater, and genuine warmth in her eyes. "I hope you'll show me how to make your cornbread sometime," she added. "Michael says it's magical." Throughout the day, I observed the subtle but profound differences. Olivia helped Emily arrange serving platters without being asked. She complimented Catherine's apple pie with specific appreciation for its crust technique. She engaged with my grandchildren at eye level, listening to their stories with genuine interest. Not once did she reach for her phone to document the gathering. Michael moved through the day with easy confidence, helping Daniel with the smoker, tossing a football with his nephews, laughing without restraint. The tension that had characterized his previous visit had vanished completely. After dinner, as twilight painted the sky in watercolor blues, Daniel prepared the fire pit. Michael and Olivia volunteered to help wash dishes, standing side by side at the sink in comfortable synchronicity. "They fit," Emily observed quietly, joining me by the window. "Not because they're trying to, but because they are who they are." When everyone gathered around the fire pit for Daniel's traditional maple cider, Michael cleared his throat. "I want to thank you all," he said, his voice steady. "A year ago, I was living someone else's version of my life. It took remarkable courage from my mother," he met my eyes across the flames, "to show me what authentic love actually means." Later, as the evening wound down and leftovers were being packed away, Olivia produced something from her bag. a set of mason jars carefully labeled with the date and contents. "I couldn't bear to see your beautiful cooking stored in plastic," she told me with a wink. The parallel to last year's containers hung unspoken between us. Similar action, profoundly different spirit. Where Vanessa had sought to extract value, Olivia sought to honor care. Where Judith had assumed entitlement, Olivia expressed gratitude. As I helped her fill the jars with brisket and beans, I noticed something etched into the glass, small maple leaves, hand-carved with patient detail. "Michael made them," she explained, following my gaze. "Said something about traditions being worth preserving properly." 2 months later, Michael and Olivia joined us for Thanksgiving. By Christmas, their relationship had deepened into a partnership built on mutual respect rather than mutual performance. When spring arrived, they planted a garden together, Olivia's knowledge of heirloom vegetables complementing Michael's irrigation designs. And when the following autumn painted our maple trees gold once more, Michael proposed to Olivia beneath their branches. No photographers, no audience, no social media announcement. Just 2 people choosing each other with clear eyes and full hearts. Their wedding, held in our backyard the next spring, reflected everything their relationship embodied. Authenticity over performance, connection over impression, substance over style. Olivia wore her mother's restored dress. Michael built the arch they stood beneath. Every detail meaningful rather than marketable. During the reception, I found Michael watching Olivia as she taught his young cousins a folk dance her grandmother had shown her. "Happy?" I asked, though his expression answered clearly. "Beyond that," he replied. "I'm myself. Finally and completely myself." As I look back now on that fateful barbecue where I finally said no, I realize how much that single word changed everything. Not just for Michael, but for me as well. I had spent my life nurturing others, believing that love meant endless giving. What I learned at 68 was that sometimes the most loving thing you can do is stand firm, even when it breaks your heart. That respect isn't just something we offer others, it's something we must demand for ourselves. The brisket at our barbecues still costs just as much, still takes just as long to prepare. But as we pass plates around the table, as conversations flow and memories are created, I know that what we're sharing isn't just food. It's respect, reciprocity, and genuine connection. Some lessons are worth every painful moment of their learning. If this story has touched something in your own life, a boundary you need to set, a relationship that diminishes rather than expands you, or the courage to say no when everything in you has been conditioned to say yes, remember this. Authentic connection can only grow in the soil of mutual respect. Thank you for joining me for this chapter of our family's journey. If you'd like to hear more stories of wisdom hard-won through the generations, subscribe to Elandra Narratives. Until next time, may your tables be surrounded by those who truly see and celebrate you.